I'm good. I just got to turn you on there. So, you're back again.
Yeah, thank
and
you.
It's great to have you back after all these weeks. I've sort of been, on my own without you sitting on the other side of the desk.
Yeah, I know. You've been doing your interviews by telephone.
Yes.
But, of course, when I'm here, we do it live, right across the desk. So that's great. But look, for me, because I've been obviously listening in each time one of the other speakers is on, it's been great for me to hear the other speakers and to hear some of the things that they say.
Yeah,
And,
last week we had Dr. Don Batten, and I found it really interesting that he was able to give us an evolutionary and creation look at, the views when it comes to plants as opposed to animals.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, he's a PhD in plant physiology, but I think the thing, and I'll get back to what he said about plants later on, but one of the things that he said that was really interesting to me was how he got involved with the creation message. Mm-hmm. And he said, he became a Christian when he was 10 years old, and obviously he would have been at school then, and his Christianity sort of sat on the shelf while he's at school and then university, but then and I think he said it was at university, he heard a creationist speaker. Mm-hmm. And he went and got the book that the speaker recommended, which was a book called The Genesis Flood by Whitcomb and Morris. Mm-hmm. And then the lights went on for him. Mm. And what was so intriguing for me is it was that very same book that got me convinced about the creation message. Yeah. That book called the Genesis Flood, because I'd been miraculously converted from atheism in my mid-30s. And that book was suggested to me as the answer to my questions, because I had plenty. And the moment I read it, I just knew that it was right. Yep. And I think there's a lesson in this, because if you want to know the truth, you'll recognise the truth when you hear it. Yep. But you've got to really want to know the truth. And lots of people, I think, really don't want to know because it's going to rock their boat in some way. They might lose friends, they might be ridiculed amongst the crowd that they're associated with. They might even be regarded as a traitor to the cause, whatever that might happen to be. So, they don't want to listen to truth. But you can't afford not to pursue truth. I think that's a lesson for Christians, particularly in these last days, because there's a warning in 2 Thessalonians for those who don't have a love of the truth, that they are going to get a very strong delusion and believe the lie. Mm-hmm. Anyway, the moment I read the book, I just knew that it was right. Everything fell into place, and I realised that everything that we see around us can be explained by Noah's flood. Mm-hmm. Now I'm not suggesting that everybody go out and get that book, because I don't even know that it's still in print, because it was published 60 years ago. But at the time, it was a groundbreaking book because there wasn't anything else. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, there's so much creationist literature around that that book is probably old hat. There's more accurate information, more updated information, and so on. But at the time, that book was fantastic. Probably one of the most important Christian books that's ever been written, in my opinion. Mm. Because it transformed my life. It obviously transformed Don Batten's life. And I've heard of a lot of other people who give the same testimony. So, a really, really, really groundbreaking Christian book.
Might be worth my while seeing if it's still in print and maybe letting people know.
Yeah, it isn't the sort of book that you'd now recommend, because, like I say, there's more up-to-date information available. Mm-hmm. But at the time, there was nothing else.
Yeah. Well, now, of course, we have Creation Ministries International.
Yeah, you've got a website that you can go to with all your questions, creation.com, and get them all answered. Yeah. And with updated information that keeps getting updated.
Yes.
So, you know, there's no point in going back to the 1960s, really.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Here on 94.9, it is 8:15. We'll come back to Dr. John very shortly. If you have any questions for him, send them through to our text line. We've got Dr. John in the studio from Creation Ministries International. And it's great to have you back, Dr. John. Been interesting, though. We've been talking about Dr. Don Batten this morning, who we spoke to over the previous couple of weeks, who's a plant scientist and super smart when it comes to all things plants.
Yeah, and he was talking about the book that that had really turned him onto the creation message, the Genesis flood. And I suppose it amazes me that anybody can ignore the effect of Noah's flood once it's pointed out to you, or can accept that it might have been a small local flood. Because when you have a look at what Genesis says about the ark that Noah built, that ark was a huge vessel. And in terms of tonnage and displacement, it's estimated that it was about a third the size of the Titanic. Now, when you say a third the size, what that really means in terms of tonnage is that it was actually about 2/3 the size in dimensions. Mm-hmm. Now, the Titanic was the largest ship ever built in when it was built, and the ark was 2/3 the size of the Titanic. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a pretty big barge. It's bit bigger than the tinnies that went around in the Lismore floods, you know.
Yes.
I mean, that's a huge vessel. Now, why would Noah need a vessel that size for a local flood? I mean, obviously he wouldn't. And the Bible tells us that it took him 100 years to build it. I mean, it would have been simpler just to pack up and move out of the area, wouldn't it? You know?
Yes. if it was only going to be local, yeah.
Yeah. You know, so no, you can't explain the flood as being anything but global. And of course, it was much more than just 40 days and 40 nights of rain. I mean, most people in New South Wales think we've had 40 days and 40 nights of rain in the last couple of months, I suppose. But no, it was more than just rain. It was massive volcanic eruptions and earthquakes that released all the subterranean water that poured out from under the earth, and that's really what gave us the water for Noah's flood. And the entire earth was transformed. I mean, those floodwaters were on the earth, covering the whole earth for a year.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a long time for the whole earth to be covered with water.
Yeah.
And the earth that we live on now, which of course is the only one that we're used to, that would be nothing like what the original earth was. Absolutely nothing like it. Completely different. And during the time those floodwaters were on the earth, the tides would have been sloshing backwards and forwards every day, sifting all the sediment that was underneath it. And, eventually at the end of the flood, according to the Bible, the earth sort of transformed itself. The mountain ranges were pushed up and the valleys sank down, and all that water ran off into the oceans as we know them now. Mm-hmm. So it was a complete remake of the whole world. So when you realise that was the effect of Noah's flood, you can see how it formed the rocks and things that we see now. Yep. And we heard from Dr. Ron Neller a couple of weeks back how even with the biggest local floods, and I mean we had a pretty big one in Lismore. Yep. People died. Lots and lots of animals died in that flood, but you don't find any lasting sedimentary layers from it, and you don't find any fossilisation of the animals. Yeah. So really, it's a completely different thing what we observe now and what happened really at the time of Noah. So, I mean, that's what I got out of that book, The Genesis Flood. You know, it was a global event, and only a global event could have formed what we see around us now. That's really what I got out of the book, and that means there's just no need for the proposed millions and billions of years that supposedly have taken to form the rock layers that you see in those diagrams in the books. You know how you open up a biology textbook and you see all these rock layers with their various names and the ages assigned to them, and how the fossils are supposed the order of evolution in the layers, but really they're just the order of burial of the things that died in the flood. Yep. You know, and the Bible makes so much sense when you look at it like that, and you realise, you wonder why all of the scientists, or so many scientists, can't believe it, because they've been taught from textbooks that give them this fossil diagram, and they believe it because there it is in a textbook. But when you look at the evidence, then you see that it can't possibly have done it that way. You know, so really that to me, and I mean, I had believed the textbooks in my atheistic days. So that's why that book was so transforming to me. I was able to see things in a completely different light, recognise that textbooks don't always tell the truth, and of course I've seen so much more untruth in them since then.
Yes, absolutely. You're on 94.9. We're with Dr. John this morning. Dr. John, we've been talking a bit about what our other friends from CMI have been talking about over the last couple of months.
Yeah, that's right. And in particular, we mentioned Dr. Don Batten from the last 2 weeks, and how he was a plant physiologist, and he made the point about the difficulty in explaining from an evolutionary point of view the evolution of plants, because there isn't really any explanation as to where they might have come from. Because if you open up a biology textbook and you read anything about the evolution of life, you hear that maybe there might have been a lightning spark hitting a sea of all sorts of chemicals or whatever, and maybe the first life formed from that. Maybe, you know, they don't really know. And of course, you'll always read in the textbooks about what they call the Miller-Urey experiment. You've probably read that yourself.
No.
Yeah, it was an experiment in a contrived atmosphere whereby electrical sparks managed to produce a couple of very basic amino acids in the sort of atmosphere that couldn't have been present in the early Earth anyway. But yeah, that's touted as you know, life was discovered, invented in a test tube. You know, all of those sort of statements that you see sensationally in the world's press. But yeah, most biology textbooks will talk about the Miller-Urey experiment as being, you know, proving that that's how life began. But I can remember hearing a DVD one time of a creationist speaker, and he was talking about that in an assembly, a big meeting, and Professor Stanley Miller happened to be in the audience. And he asked him if he'd like to comment and justify what the textbook was saying, but he declined.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, you know, I mean, how we explain, well, you know, the textbooks usually say that that's how life began, and it began in the sea, and, you know, eventually got more complex, and these creatures crawled out onto land and, you know, populated the land. But there's no real explanation as to where all the plants came from.
Yep.
And when you look at what's buried in the sediment, the fossils, there's lots of fossil plants, but they're all the same as the modern day plants. You know, there's really no evidence of evolution in the plants. And when you go back to the Bible, according to Genesis, God created the plants to be food for the animals and man that he was about to create. Mm-hmm. And that entire original animal kingdom was created to be vegetarian. Right? There was no, before the fall, there was no evidence that anything died or killed each other or whatever, or ate meat. But, of course, by the time of the flood, according to the Bible, the whole earth had been corrupted. It was filled with violence, and I have no doubt that, the Bible specifically says that's why God decided to destroy that first world. Now, I don't have any doubt that nature was red in tooth and claw by that stage, and that people were eating meat, maybe not Noah's family, but when Noah took all those animals on board the ark, the Bible tells us that he had to take all the food for them as well. And I'm certain that would have been vegetarian food. They wouldn't have been getting any meat. But we know that even animals like the big cats can survive perfectly well on a vegetarian diet. In fact, I believe that during the war in London, when there just wasn't enough meat around, the lions and tigers got on perfectly well with vegetables as their food. Animals that normally do eat meat can survive perfectly well. You think about it, all the dried food for your pet that you get in the supermarket. Some of it might be meat-based or fish-based or whatever, but you can create that artificially anyway. They don't need to be eating fish or meat or whatever, even though they might like it. I think they can get on perfectly well without that. But after the flood, then Noah was given the concession by God that everything could be killed and eaten apart from the unclean animals, and he was not allowed to eat blood, of course. So although vegetarianism was part of the original creation, it's not that way any longer. And from the wording of Genesis, I think both meat and vegetables are now part of our diet, because God said every living thing that moves now can be food for you, just as I've created all the plants. So it looks to me as though that mixed diet was certainly sanctioned by God. Now, I don't think you can specify that one type of diet is better or more righteous than another, either vegetarianism or meat eating. And you read about the things like the so-called caveman diet, where you're encouraged to eat pretty much only meat on the belief that cavemen weren't farmers and they only hunted game and ate meat. But of course, although people did live in caves at one time, there's really no such thing as the caveman era. And caves were formed and only existed really after Noah's flood. So it's not all that long ago, only about 4,500 years. So I don't know that you can justify the caveman diet as being the best diet.
No, but I mean, I know a lot of men that they believe the best diet for a man is just meat.
Yeah, well, that's why they call it
but they don't live in caves anymore. They live in normal houses, and they still reckon
they do call it the caveman diet. But and so we know that Noah probably did eat meat, but he also was a vegetarian, because the Bible tells us that he planted a vineyard after the flood, and then he got drunk on the wine. So he was obviously eating meat and vegetables and washing it down with a few glasses of reds. So that was Noah. And I've met people who've said that going back to vegetarianism has actually transformed their life and health. And I can't deny that. But there's no doubt that meat eating is a God-given concession. Now, Even so, I don't have any quarrel with people who've freely chosen to go vegetarian, for all sorts of reasons, in the belief that it's a healthier lifestyle, and there's no doubt that that's how we were originally created. And of course, a lot of people don't like the idea of killing and eating animals, and I can understand that too, and but unfortunately, sometimes people go to the extreme, and we've seen some of the vegetarian crusaders who've gone picketing farms and things like that, which obviously you can't really justify, because people are entitled to eat what they choose. But it's very, very interesting. But I think a mixed diet is sanctioned by the Bible. But people are free to choose whatever they want to do.
National, if you have any questions for him, send them through to our text line 0401 949 949. Now, we've just been talking about eating meat or being vegetarian. Of course, in the Bible it says, every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you. But it also says in the Old Testament, it talks about different types of meat, Dr. John, that aren't much good for us, like shellfish and pigs, and just to name a few.
Yes. Well, that's right, and a lot of people have decided from the Bible not to eat certain things like that. And as I said before, I can understand people deciding to go vegetarian because they don't like the idea of killing and eating animals and so on. And there's no doubt that some of the intensive farming practices that we have in the world today are pretty unsavoury, and if people realise what actually does go on in those practices, then they might be turned off a bit as well. We are very, very sanitised in our modern day, because everything we eat we go and buy at the supermarket, and it all looks neatly packaged and sterile and all of this sort of stuff, and you really don't have because we're not farming communities anymore. We don't live in villages where we're a mixed group of people. Then we don't really have a good idea of where all of these things come from and the way they are produced. And of course, a lot of the intensive farming practices have had unintended consequences. I mean, the overuse of antibiotics in veterinary medicine and in farming has been a great contributor to the antibiotic resistance that we see today. So there's a lot of things that are bad that have been contributed to by this sort of thing. Yep. And most of it, of course, is economically driven, because there's more profit if you do things in a certain way. And again, the Bible says the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. So, we know that a lot of things come from a love of money, and it may be economically desirable, but it's not quite so good for the animals. So, I think the vegetarians have got a lot of pretty good points that they do make. And of course, it's really part of the fallen world that we live in, and it's not going to be put back right until Jesus returns. And for us as Christians, we really should be praying, Maranatha, come Lord Jesus, because what we do know is that when he returns, all of those worst aspects of our fallen world are going to be done away with. And there are so many things that, people really wouldn't want to know goes on. Yeah. And like I say, won't it be wonderful when the Lord returns and the whole thing is made new again?
Yes, absolutely.
That's the day that I'm really looking forward to, and I'm sure you are too, Mick.
Yes.
And we have confidence that day is coming, and it may be not too far hence.
So keep the oil in the lamps.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes. Okay, well, thank you, Dr. John. Awesome having you back again. Do we have you next week?
I'll be here again next week, Vic. Yeah.
Excellent. It is 6 minutes to 9. And, just don't forget, creation.com. Creation Ministries International have their own website with over 13,000 pages of information. So get on there and you'll get any questions answered when it comes to creation, evolution. It would be tough to find one that they don't answer. If there's one that you find that isn't in there, please send it to us. Or if you do have a question and you'd like us to answer it on air, so as maybe a lot of other people can listen to the answer, please send us those questions. 0401 949 949. Thank you, Dr. John. We'll see you next week.
See you then, Mick.